Supongo que a esta altura ya todos sabrán lo que habrá pasado con Maradona. El día 25 de noviembre se anunció su fallecimiento y en Argentina y en el mundo entero, en el mundo del fútbol, se generó una sensación de tristeza de tal vez el futbolista más grande de todos los tiempos. Yo, estando acá en Inglaterra, un lugar que ha marcado realmente la carrera futbolística de Maradona, me llamaba la atención ver cómo las personas lo veían, cómo las personas opinaban de él sobre como futbolista, como lo que hizo contra Inglaterra, como él como persona, cómo se ven las noticias y qué opinan de distintas cosas. Así que voy a hablar con dos hinchas del Leeds United, también hinchas del fútbol en general y que les gusta mucho Maradona. Uno es Paul, del Leeds That Podcast, uno de los podcasts más famosos que hay sobre el Leeds, ahí dando vuelta, un podcast muy bueno, en inglés obviamente, así que lo pueden ir a escuchar. Y la otra persona es Oscar, de All Leeds TV, un canal de YouTube que se dedica a subir videos sobre el Leeds. Repito, los dos muy hinchas del fútbol y tienen una relación particular con Maradona, ellos siendo ingleses y tan amantes de este deporte. Esto lo pueden ver en formato video, lo pueden escuchar en formato podcast. No hace falta que lo vean, el video lo pueden escuchar simplemente porque va a ser solamente una videollamada. Así que espero que se sienten, se relajen, disfruten. Lo voy a ir traduciendo mientras ellos van hablando al final de cada pregunta. Así que espero que les guste. Bueno, primero les voy a preguntar cómo recibieron las noticias, qué estaban haciendo y cómo les cayó. Okay guys, how did you receive the news? What were you doing? How do you feel at that moment? Could you believe it? How was it? Let's start with Oscar first.
Well, I was just finishing work actually when I saw the news. It just flashed up on my phone, and obviously, I know Diego hadn't had great news a couple of months before. Had the operation, and you kind of thought, that he was kind of on his way to recovery. So it was a really horrifying shock, to be honest, because he's one of those characters that, yes, he wasn't everyone's favourite player, in terms of, wasn't someone everyone liked, but he was someone everyone kind of looked at and had to acknowledge that he was such a fantastic footballer, such a fantastic player, and a complete entertainer. He lived such an incredible life. He probably lived in 60 years, probably four people's lives kind of thing. It was just a remarkable story, and probably one of the most remarkable sportsmen ever, to be honest. Never mind footballer, sportsman, in terms of his story, how much joy he brought to so many people. And look, obviously, there's a lot of things about being English. You shouldn't like Maradona, but for me, you can't help but respect what he's done for the game.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that later. Nos dice acá Oscar que obviamente no lo podía creer, que estaba contento porque él se había mejorado hace un par de meses, pero que sin duda le cayó mal porque es uno de los grandes deportistas del mundo, sacando el fútbol, dejando el fútbol de lado, y un gran hombre de entretenimiento, lo dice, pero sí, que obviamente respeta mucho lo que hizo por el juego. What about you, Paul?
Actually, my 16-year-old nephew texted me and my brother saying, reports are saying Maradona has died, like exclamation mark, which tells you something, because we had a brief chat before about the fact that I'm in my mid-30s, so actually was slightly too young for Maradona's playing days, but my nephew's 20 years younger than me, and so it shows that he is somebody who has affected people or across such a wide age range.
Acá nos dice que su sobrino, que es 20 años más joven que él, le dijo que le dio la noticia que Maradona había muerto, lo que significa que por ser alguien tan joven, él tiene 35, su sobrino es 20 años más joven, la dimensión de Maradona en alguien tan chiquitito causar eso. So, the next question is, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of Maradona, Paul? ¿Qué es lo primero que se le viene a la mente cuando piensa en Maradona?
Genius, but possibly flawed genius. I think you can compare him to so many other people, and it's someone who probably was without peers in his playing days. When you talk about Messi, you don't tend to talk about Messi without saying Ronaldo in the same sentence. But when people talk about Maradona, there's no one who paralleled him at the time in which he was playing.
Nos dice que obviamente fue un genio y que compara, por ejemplo, ahora cuando se dice de Messi, que también se lo compara con Ronaldo, pero Maradona en su época no había nadie con quien compararlo. What about you, Oscar? What do you think? When you think of Maradona, what's the first thing that pops in your mind?
Entertainer, I think it's got to be the first thing that pops to mind. I think for me, obviously, same as Paul, I never saw Maradona live. I can only go off, mainly highlights, the odd kind of full game you can watch back. But, every single game I've seen of Maradona, especially at the 1986 World Cup, he's the best player on the pitch, not just by a mile, just thousands of miles, like just the best player on the pitch in every single game. I've said before, I think that is the peak any footballer's ever hit in terms of just peak level performance. I think he got 5 goals, 5 assists in 5 games at that World Cup, and he wasn't even the striker; he was number 10.
True.
I can't quite recall who Argentina's number 9 was at the time, but I remember reading up on like the 1986 World Cup. He wasn't particularly rated, but playing behind Maradona, everyone's game elevated, not just the attackers, the defenders. He was just a warrior, a battler. And look, there's a lot made of that England game, but for me, it's very much sour grapes, for any Englishman to still go on about that, because at the end of the day, it happens in football, the hand of God. And, obviously you'd have to, just to focus on that would be totally wrong, in terms of what he did in that World Cup, not just the England game, but the Belgium semi-final, again, another incredible performance, and obviously the final against Germany, absolutely unbelievable. But just what a fantastic player. I mean, obviously, he's had spells at Barcelona that get kind of forgotten about as well, where there's a lot of thing about his only decent spell in club football was at Napoli, but that's not true at all. Obviously, for Boca Juniors, at Barcelona, the potential was always clear. And obviously Napoli was his peak of his performances, but to elevate his country, his team, just incredible. I don't think you'll ever see that again. I think even when you talk about people like Leo Messi, Ronaldo, etc., I don't think you'll ever quite see that kind of level in terms of that whole. He was just a complete package, wasn't he, Maradona? The complete package, the entertainer. Not everyone's biggest fan, but I don't think he cared about that. I think he was very much, you're either with or not. You were either with or weren't with Maradona as such. He had his critics, but he had people who loved him in just as much volume as well. So he's just quite an extraordinary person. I think obviously there's a lot that doesn't get mentioned about Maradona. I think obviously in terms of the English media, there's a lot of focus on the bad sides of him. But for me, there was.
Yeah, we'll get into that later, because that's a really interesting topic, even in Argentina. Nos dice que obviamente lo primero que se le viene a la mente es como una persona de entretenimiento, de los mejores futbolistas, el mejor que ha dado este juego, de cómo mejoraba a su equipo en general, defensores, a los atacantes, la cantidad de asistencia de goles que tenía por más de no ser delantero, simplemente eso, de cosas que ha hecho no solo en Napoli, pero también en Barcelona, en la selección obviamente, en Boca, un montón de cosas que sin duda para él lo llevan a lo más alto, y se enfocó en algo, empezó a hablar de la prensa de Inglaterra. Le vamos a preguntar cómo separan ellos el hecho de que sea el mejor jugador del mundo, pero que le haya hecho tanto daño futbolístico a Inglaterra. So, Paul, how do you separate thinking of Maradona as one of the biggest players in the world and what he did to England in a footballistic way, if you want to talk about it that way? I mean, how do you love someone that much and then know what he's done to your country or to your national football team?
It's really interesting because I think that reading up a little bit around it as well, I think it's a whole part of the cultural differences, and that's the beauty of football is that it's a sport that anybody can play all over the world, and you don't need a great deal of equipment. And Maradona shows that where he came from, and lots of other world famous players. But thinking about our own club and thinking about the Spygate incident with Marcelo Bielsa, and the fact that how appalled the English media were, and Frank Lampard in particular, but how Marcelo quite calmly explained that it was, he appreciates that was part of his culture. He understands it's not part of the culture here, therefore he won't do it. Is it how he was still is regarded as a man of honor, and looking at how for a lot of Englishmen the fact that Maradona would never apologize or acknowledge that what he did was wrong, and in fact called it the hand of God. And even when I don't know if it's Argentinian culture or South American culture, because you see incidents with people like Suarez with the handball on the line against Ghana, So it's fascinating to look from a cultural perspective how people see things differently around the world. How for him doing that was the noble and right thing to do in that moment in time, whereas as Englishmen we're all like, how awful.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you something later, which is related to this. Just let me translate it. Nos dice que obviamente nos habla un poquito de las barreras culturales, de cómo el fútbol rompe barreras culturales, que lo ve, tal vez dice, no cree como algo sudamericano, esto de la mano de Dios, por ejemplo, que del lado de los ingleses los ven como qué mal, esos juegos sucios, etcétera, etcétera, pero nos marca un poquitito eso. And what about you, Oscar? Is there like a little bit, like a little piece of your heart that is hurting a little bit when you know what he's done, or you just forget about it, just happened once, and that's it?
I think obviously there's a lot of talk about what would have happened had England got through in that game against Argentina, but this is England we're talking about. We are specialists in finding a way to mess up in some way in the World Cup and not win. So I'm not convinced it was as costly as what has been made out. I know Peter Shilton, the goalkeeper in that situation, is probably never ever going to let it go, to be fair. I don't think anyone from that England team is going to let it go, to be fair. But yeah, no, obviously, there was elements of Diego Maradona's play which you could be very critical of. I think sometimes you could say, I think one of the big criticisms was, had he, in terms of off the field, been a little bit more disciplined, i.e., being games and that lot, and training and that lot, could he have maybe even gone up another level? I think there's definitely a case for that. That's obviously something that Paul was kind of alluding to, the cultural differences, certainly at that time as well. Obviously Maradona being a South American and Argentinian in Europe kind of thing, it wasn't as heard of back then. It was just. I think the big thing with Maradona, he was like a rock star in Naples. I think you have to see from the reaction. And even when Maradona ever visited back to Naples, I think I watched a couple of videos, actually a couple of weeks ago, to be fair. I think it was in 2005. Maradona going back to Naples, bearing in mind like left 15 years ago. Napoli's had some relatively decent success since, but it's quite incredible. Just people gathering outside his hotel room, and it is incredible. I think it's similar. I think what the perfect thing for Maradona was that when he went to Napoli, he found that perfect culture for himself. Very similar kind of ideas in that lot, and it was kind of a perfect marriage for a long, long time. But obviously in Barcelona, obviously I've spent a little bit of my life in Barcelona, and obviously talk about Maradona. He's a strange subject in Barcelona somehow. He doesn't quite get the credit he deserves in terms of pure performances. I think a lot goes back to, I think it was the 1984 Spanish Copa del Rey final. I think it was his last game for Barcelona, which turned into a battle and literally just fist fight in between Bilbao and Barcelona players, and that was kind of it for Maradona's time in Barcelona. I think that very much tainted his legacy in Barcelona, but he scored plenty of goals and he brought a lot of joy to Barcelona fans at the time. But yeah, I think he will never quite get the respect he deserves because of different cultures. I think in England, I think the way sometimes he behaved on the pitch from time to time, I don't think people saw past that in terms of what he could bring on the pitch, if that makes sense, in terms of raw footballing ability.
Yeah, no, what you mean. Ahí nos dice que tal vez si él se hubiese comportado un poquito mejor fuera del campo de juego, la gente lo hubiese respetado un poquito más, pero es esa actitud fuera de la cancha lo que no le terminó de encerrar tal vez al público inglés, que le hubiesen ayudado a que su imagen creciera un poquitito más, pero igual entiende que en lugares como Napoli es un dios, o que en Barcelona también, si bien no se le da mucho reconocimiento que merece, para él siempre jugó muy bien, pero él cree eso, que tal vez si él fuera de la cancha, las cosas que ha hecho no estaban muy bien vistas por el público inglés, por su manera de ser. Y ahora les voy a preguntar qué hubiese pasado si la mano de Dios hubiese sido inglesa. Now, guys, you're saying that there's like a cultural difference between maybe South America and England and the way he behaved. What would have happened, Paul, if the hand of God was like made by an English striker? Would you have celebrated it?
Oh, the first thing that I can think of is a penalty incident that happened with Robbie Fowler against Arsenal, where the penalty was given, and he got up and wagged his finger and went, "No, ref, I went down." Yeah. So you'd like to think that it just wouldn't happen, but I'm sure there's many incidents. I don't know whether we'd have felt guilty. That's a tricky question. It's hard to say, but it's easy to sit here and say it's just not an English thing to do, so it wouldn't have happened. But there's plenty of occasions, particularly in the modern game, where simulation is creeping in and almost encouraging parts of the modern game. So I don't know, maybe in the 80s people just wouldn't have had it, but times change.
Dice que recuerda un penal del Leeds que una vez un jugador se tiró, el juez cobró penal y el jugador se levantó y dijo que no había sido penal, que se había tirado, y cree que, hablando con el diario del lunes, luego de muchos años, cree que no hubiese estado bien, que no se hubiesen sentido orgullosos, pero él dice que también que es muy fácil para él decirlo hoy en día, pero eso es lo que él cree. What about you, Oscar? Will you have celebrated it? What do you think?
I think Paul's spot on, in terms of saying that it's different kind of time. I think in England at that time, I think England almost was kind of like 15, 20 years behind kind of South America in terms of simulation and what we call, I suppose, the dark arts of the game.
Yeah.
I think obviously since kind of 1986, we've seen obviously a lot of players from South America come into the Premier League and initially get a lot of criticism, to be fair. Initially get a lot of criticism. Obviously Suarez, I think Paul's already mentioned. Known for diving quite a lot, Diego Costa, etc., people like that. And, I think there's like a naivety, I think, to England at that time. It wasn't quite, it didn't quite use the dark arts to its advantage at the time. And that's quite simply, what I think what has to be said as well is with that situation, the hand of God, is that the referee is still the person I'd probably blame the most. How he didn't spot possibly one of those. It wasn't even like a handball down here. It was kind of like in the air kind of thing. I still don't get my head around that. The linesman, referee, how anyone didn't spot that. But that's who I probably blame more than the actual player who did it. To be honest, I think it's instinct. When you see so much of it happen, from time to time, and it was just instinct. I think from Maradona, I don't think he's a cheat per se. I think obviously, there's a lot of times when I think obviously the big thing with like players like Maradona, Messi, etc. They get fouled a lot. Neymar, players like that, they get fouled a lot and get kicked quite a lot. And I think from an English point of view, there's a lot of it is he's gone down easy there, but there's never kind of the focus on the player who's actually committed the foul and isn't even trying to win the ball. They're just trying to foul the player and just stop them at all costs to an extent. And that's kind of the difference in I think in kind of like the way each other sees the game. I think Argentina is very much encouraging the Maradonas, the Messis, and obviously South America, Neymar, Ronaldinho, players like that. I don't think you really get many players like that in England, kind of silky players. We're more kind of physical players in that lot. We kind of sit on the other side like, they go down easy. We can use our physicality against them. And it's just a different way of looking at the game again.
Nos dice que Inglaterra, como su historia, no ha tenido jugadores de este estilo como pícaros, como tramposos, entre comillas, porque es su forma de ser, su estilo, que es tal vez como ellos para algo más de Sudamérica, que no se vería bien como en el público en general, que los hay, no dice que no los hay, pero también entiende a los jugadores de este estilo habilidosos, que le hacen muchos fulls, que todo el tiempo le están pegando para tirarlo al suelo, y que en ese momento, en la jugada de la mano de Dios, culpa más al árbitro que no lo vio que a Maradona en sí, porque dice que también es un poco de instinto, pero recalca esta idea de que tal vez el fútbol inglés no ha tenido este tipo de cosas, de picardías que hasta hoy en día son mal vistas por el público en general. So in Argentina, guys, we have this debate between the Maradona, the player, and the person. Les voy a preguntar por el Maradona jugador y la persona, cómo ven ellos las noticias desde Inglaterra, si llegaban este tipo de noticias. So some people say he was a really good footballer, which he was, of course, but then some people say, how can you love someone who's done all the things he's done? Do you normally, maybe back in the day, receive or heard this news in the UK about him, or you just concentrated on him as a footballer? Paul, let's start with you. Is it a topic? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, it's all over the media today, and growing up and knowing of Maradona, I've said before, and actually Marcelo Bielsa today said that he's an artist, and that was referring to his qualities as a footballer, but equally he lived, as Oscar said, the life of a rock star to an extent. And you may have heard of Maradona without knowing about football in the same way that you might have heard of, I'd say, Michael Jordan with basketball, or Hulk Hogan with wrestling, and players like that. And he lived his life in the public eye. And I think players that you may compare him to on a certain scale within the English game might be like Paul Gascoigne or Wayne Rooney, whose talent, if not managed and nurtured in the right way with the right group of people and the right advice, could easily spill over and have their lives destroyed. And I think Wayne Rooney's just about had it handled to an extent that he's maybe learned from people like Maradona and people like Gascoigne, and football, I think, has done a lot of work to try and move forwards with that. But yeah, very much so over here, you're acutely aware of all the issues that, because in the UK we love tabloid newspapers, and we love a story that even if it was going to destroy the chances of the England football team, the papers would run it because they would prefer to have a big shocking story.
Yeah.
We love that over here. So Maradona fills pages and pages.
Bueno, nos dice que sí, que mucha parte del periodismo británico es muy amarillista, que si bien obviamente se sabe lo que fue Maradona futbolísticamente, mucha gente lo conoce tal vez y no sabe que ni siquiera juega al fútbol por todo lo que ha hecho fuera de la cancha, que vivió la vida de una estrella de rock, y lo compara con Wayne Rooney, por ejemplo, que dice que él tal vez supo aprender en cierto modo de Maradona o de gente que lo rodeaba a no pasar esos límites que Maradona ha hecho. Pero mi pregunta era si acá se hablaba de eso, y nos está diciendo que sí. What about you, Oscar? Do you agree with Paul? I guess that there's been a lot of talk on his personal life in the UK even.
Yeah, I think, of course. I think with any player like Maradona, I think obviously Paul mentioned Paul Gascoigne. I think another example I can think of is like Ronaldinho to an extent. Obviously, he's been in prison recently. I think all players of that kind of type who, because I think now the game's going towards a stage where everything's about structure. Everyone's kind of played like robots these days. I think all footballers, they've got to behave well in the public eye. They've got to turn up to training. They've got to do this, this, and this. It's all very tactical now, I think, the game. I don't think the game is built for people like Maradona, Gascoigne, Ronaldinho, etc. People like that. Artists who can just change a game on their own, can control the game, run the team on their own kind of thing, like Maradona did. And I think that's part of what made Maradona so good, was that he was just off the cuff. Everything he did was off the cuff, even in his personal life. And that was the big thing with Maradona. I think he had that personality that almost not carefree personality, but that personality where he wanted to entertain before anything. It wasn't necessarily always about winning. I think he did say as much in the quote before. He said the number 10 is I can't remember the exact quote, but I think he said the number 10 is the person who's got to run the game to an extent. It's got to make the crowds enjoy the football and that. But I think it was something to...
Bueno, acá nos contaba que obviamente todas estas personas como Maradona tal vez no están hechas para el prototipo del fútbol hoy, que los jugadores tienen que ser más estrictos, tienen que ser más como si fuesen robots. Entonces genera todo esto, pero nos sigue contestando la pregunta de que sí, de que fuera de lo que hacía él en la cancha o lo que hacía él jugando, sí se hablaba mucho acá. Vamos a ir a las últimas preguntas. Okay guys, just a couple of more questions, just 5 more minutes or so. Do you think le voy a preguntar si creen que hay una diferencia entre su generación, entre los 30 y los 40, y la gente más grande. Si tal vez ellos, al ser más chicos, lo quieren más a Maradona, y los más grandes tienen como una relación amor y odio. Do you think there's a difference, Paul, between your generation and older people on how much you like or dislike Maradona?
People who lived through the World Cup, and I think he's going to be much more like what we call a Marmite figure. And we say with Marmite, you either love it or you hate it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of a lot of English people won't let go of that. That's what happens with sport. That happens with Leeds fans in a lot of things. We hold on to things for a long time, and so yeah, I think a lot of older fans would still harbour that bit of resentment. But equally, they're the people who've had the chance to see his genius on the pitch. Whereas like for Oscar and I, and well, speaking on Oscar's behalf, but people of our generation and younger, people like my nephew, are watching clips on YouTube, and they're seeing what they've told, and people have told them, and seeing all the news today and all the clips, and you look and think, wow. I think even Rio Ferdinand said that if the pitches back then were shocking as well, and if he was playing on modern pitches, if you put him in the context of today's game, he'd be unplayable.
Bien, bueno, nos dice que sí, puede ser que la generación anterior esté un poquito más resentida porque obviamente vio todo lo que fue el Mundial 86 y lo entiende que esas son las cosas del deporte, que a veces es difícil olvidarse de las derrotas y que si su generación más joven no tiene en consideración eso a la hora de juzgar cuánto quieren o no quieren a Maradona. What about you, Oscar? I don't know if you got the question. If older generations dislike Maradona more because they saw the 1986 World Cup.
Yeah, I think obviously, with what Paul said there, I think Maradona did have that disadvantage that I think the refereeing in those days as well was a lot more lenient towards the defenders. I think it took a lot to get a yellow card in those days. I think it took 4 or 5 fouls sometimes you got away with. You didn't see as many red cards, and I think certainly in today's game, I don't think people could stop Maradona in the way they did then in terms of just trying to make tactical fouls, I think they call it these days, and that was what they tried to do against him. But I think obviously the 1986 World Cup is what I think we all go back to in terms of what peak Maradona to an extent. But yeah, I think obviously that moment is what's caused the older generations to be maybe not so much. I obviously dislike him to an extent. Yeah, not that I think that's the right thing to do as such, but I think it makes people see him in a different light. I think it does that for any kind of like legend. I think obviously you look at Lionel Messi at Barcelona, the way the last kind of years played out at Barcelona, he's wanted to lead the club. All of a sudden, everything he's done for the last 12, 15 years goes out of the window, as to say, it's forgotten about, let's say. And I think to an extent, that was the same with Maradona. I think people didn't remember his genius outside of South America. And yeah, I think part of the issue as well was that the longevity of his career to an extent. Obviously at Napoli, left Napoli at 31, I think it was, in 1991. And he didn't really, in terms of club career, didn't really do anything after that. I think he went to Sevilla for a little bit, went to Newell's Old Boys, but wasn't really at the same heights as before. And obviously that's for one reason or another, off the field issues, and some really bad luck as well, to be fair, with injuries and little bits and pieces like that. But the thing is, Maradona, I think he is, in terms of the World Cup, the best World Cup player of all time. I think he is the most iconic player in World Cup history for me in terms of carrying a team on his own, consistent performance. 1986, 1990, and even the start of 1994. And let's not forget 1982 as well, when he was 21, when he was playing in Spain. And there's no denial that in terms of Argentina, he's probably the greatest international footballer of all time. And if he had a longer career in terms of in the club game after Napoli, he probably would be acknowledged as higher than Messi, to be fair, higher than Pele, higher than etc. Players of that kind of caliber. If not, I think there's an argument to say he is higher, to be fair, in terms of pure natural ability though.
Dice que sí, obviamente que todo eso influye y que también su generación, que no lo vio en el Mundial 86, como que tuvo la parte de caída de Maradona, obviamente no estaba en su máximo esplendor y eso también puede sumar, y que si su carrera puede haber sido un poquito más larga o si tal vez luego del Napoli podría haber estado en mejores condiciones, hoy estaría puesto en los más altos sin ninguna duda, pero sí juegan un poquito esas cosas de las generaciones, qué época vieron y qué época no vieron. And now just 2 more questions, a short one. First, Paul, do you think he's the biggest character in the world that has created such a religion around a human being? Le estoy preguntando si cree que hay otra persona en el mundo que ha generado tanto alrededor de su figura como si fuese una religión en términos de seguidores. Do you think so, Paul? Outside not only sports, but everything.
Oh yeah. Before we joined today, I saw a clip on the news of that he's lying in rest in a sort of state position where people are going past his coffin and throwing the shirts on and throwing gestures, and that's the kind of thing that's only held for special people and sort of deities and regal people. So he's had this aura about him, and we at Leeds talk about Marcelo Bielsa as being God, and we've kind of created this little thing around Bielsa, but the scale of it with Maradona, and you see this outpouring of true grief. It says it all.
Yeah. Compara un poquito con lo que es Bielsa para el Leeds, pero dice que Maradona obviamente es una escala mundial, lo que se genera esta especie de religión, que él ve imágenes de la Casa de Gobierno de Argentina O sea, él estando ahí en el velorio, la gente tirándole cosas como si realmente fuese, lo estuviesen venerando. Dice que eso no lo ha visto. What about you, Oscar? Have you seen something similar with any other person?
No, in one way of putting it, no, I can't really think of anything. Certainly in a football scale, I can't think of anything that kind of compares to this. I think in terms of, you still go to Naples today, and Maradona left Napoli 30 years ago, and you're still seeing Naples today. Last time I went,
Yeah.
everywhere, and I mean everywhere.
Yeah.
Buildings, restaurants, everywhere. Every single establishment in Naples, there is some kind of dedication to Maradona. That's the impact he had on the city, not just the Napoli football club, the city. I don't personally think, other than maybe Cruyff at Barcelona and Ajax, I can't think of anything that kind of compares to just lifting a whole city, lifting the whole club, who had achieved nothing but really before that. And I don't think anything really compares to that, other than maybe possibly Johan Cruyff. But I think for me, Maradona is in that league of his own in that respect.
Dice que sí, que no hay otra cosa única, por lo menos dentro del fútbol, pero cree que en muchas cosas. Pone el ejemplo de Napoli, de cómo cambió una ciudad, no solamente un club de fútbol, sino una ciudad que hasta hoy, 20 años después de que se haya ido, 30 años, la gente lo sigue amando, se ve en todos lados, edificios, restaurantes. Dice que nunca ha visto cosa igual. Now last one, Oscar first. How close was him to play in England and for Leeds United? ¿Cuán a punto, cuán cerca estuvo de jugar en Inglaterra y en el Leeds United? Because I saw some posts on Instagram today, and I think he was about to play for Leeds United or something like that. Or maybe Paul, you can help us there. What do you know, Oscar?
It was, I believe it was Sheffield United. I think it was. I think Alejandro Sabella played for Leeds, who's kind of linked closely to Maradona. But yeah, Maradona was linked quite close to Sheffield United. I think it was before he went to Barcelona in 1982. Again, I'm not sure exactly how close he was, but my word, I mean, that must be a regret, not seeing someone of that stature playing in England. I don't think we have ever seen someone quite at that level before playing in England, and it's our loss to an extent. Let's hope we get Messi playing in this country one day. But because that's that's probably the only substitution you'll probably get for Maradona, I think.
Cree que estuvo cerca de jugar para el Sheffield United, pero no estaba muy seguro de que sin duda le hubiese encantado ver a un jugador de esa magnitud en su equipo y en su país, y espera que aunque sea hoy Messi fuese, porque sería como la única cosa tal vez posible de igualar a alguien tan igual. What about you, Paul? How true is this story? Because I think you posted, or the list that account posted something on Instagram today.
Yeah, I think part of it was to do the way that the club worked at the time. I think part of it was put out there by the club as a publicity stunt, that you associated yourselves with names. And I think it happened with Gascoigne as well, that at the time it was something to do with pacifying the club's fans by linking yourself to, and Ronaldo and like Ronaldinho. Basically, Leeds United, if you can link a big name to them, then we'll take it.
Yeah, but it was never like a real thing.
Not as far as I know.
Dice que fue más como una estrategia del club, que jugaban con nombres y jugadores y hinchas, pero que nunca fue como una cosa realmente real. Okay, guys, thank you very, very much. I'll let you go now. It was way more than 20 minutes. I'm really sorry. But anyway, I really appreciate your time and that you give me the opportunity to talk about football, which is the most beautiful thing in the world. So I really appreciate your time. And it's quite interesting for me to see how people from England mainly love such a controversial character out there. So thank you very much, guys. And whenever you need something from me, you know where you can find me. Bueno, ahí pasaban Oscar y Paul, dos hinchas de Leeds, hinchas ingleses, que nos explicaban un poquito qué es Maradona para ellos, qué es un poco Maradona para el fútbol inglés en general. Esto es lo que genera una figura deportiva tan grande, enorme, que cruza fronteras culturales, fronteras de países, un montón de cosas, y que es controversia en el mundo y en esta nación, en Inglaterra, donde estamos ahora, que tantas cosas buenas le ha dado a las generaciones jóvenes y tantas cosas malas, entre comillas, a las generaciones un poco más antiguas. Así que muchísimas gracias, gente, por haber visto este video. Espero que les haya interesado ver cómo la gente local lo ve, cómo la gente local lo vive. Esto es lo que puedo aportar de este lado de del mundo, de este lado de mi camarita, así que espero que lo hayan disfrutado, una muy linda charla. Gracias gente y será hasta la próxima.